Like Sadie, I love that story of Thomas Potter and John Murray. First of all, I just love the idea that we skeptical Unitarian Universalists have a miracle story. It's one of those stories from our history that probably isn't 100% true, but speaks to a lot of truths about our faith and our world. I always try to put myself in the shoes of Thomas Potter when I hear that story. What must it have been like to build a church that he wasn't sure would ever get used? What were those 10 years like for him between the time he built that church and the time that John Murray arrived and preached? What was it like for him in that time between when he first had his vision and when that vision became a reality? Now, Thomas Potter is presented in the story as eternally hopeful. He builds this church and is just totally confident that one day a preacher will come and preach about love and universal salvation. It seems that his vision is unwavering. Even when John Murray finally arrives, Thomas is so confident as he tries to convince John Murray to preach. He's so confident that he just comes out and says, "Are you the preacher I've been waiting for?" And assumes that John Murray's going to say yes. Thomas Potter always seems completely certain that his plan will work out in the end. But I would imagine that it was actually not an easy 10 years. We're probably not hearing the whole story. There were probably a lot of people who questioned Thomas Potter, who believed that he was nothing more than a dreamer. There were probably days when Potter doubted his own vision, perhaps even despaired of his vision ever becoming a reality. There were probably days when he doubted himself and his faith. Thomas Potter was a human, after all, and doubt is a natural part of our human experience. I'm sure any of you who have had or have a vision that has taken time or is taking time to become a reality have experienced questioning and doubt. So where did Potter get the patience and strength to keep believing in that vision? How did he make it through those 10 years and still feel so confident in his vision that he just seemed to know that those winds weren't going to change before Sunday? I wonder if his unending hope had something to do with the theology that he espoused. There's something eternally hopeful about the concept of universalism. To be a universalist originally meant that you believed that everyone was saved, that everyone would go to heaven. Now, different types of universalists had slightly different timelines for this, but in the end, the vision was clear. Everyone made it to heaven. In many ways, it was the ultimate message of hope, especially in a time when the prevailing religious sentiment was one of universal depravity and selective salvation. And so I wonder if that promise that in the end everything would work out was part of what made it easy for Thomas Potter to keep believing in his vision, to keep hoping that that preacher would come for all of those years. These days, we talk about universalism a little differently because we're more focused on this world rather than on any worlds that might or might not come after death. For us, universal salvation is not about getting into heaven necessarily, but about creating heaven here on earth. It is about our vision for the beloved community realized. Some people say it simply. Universalism means that love wins in the end. To be a universalist means being a person of vision and a person of hope. Like Victoria Safford wrote in the piece that Ellen shared, this is not about sunshiny optimism, but a gritty, serviceable hope. Earlier in her sermon, Safford likens this type of gritty, serviceable hope to the kind of hope that the prophets of the Hebrew Bible held on to. She says that the prophets of old would come into a town bifocally, saying, yes, I see the conditions here, and at the same time I see something else. I see the circumstances under which you live, the poverty, the resources spilled for war, the refugees, the racism, the hateful walls you build. I see your apparent and appalling disinterest in affordable health care, affordable housing, affordable education, your strange systems of taxation which belie a preferential option for the rich. I see the despoiling of your water and your land. The prophet would come into town and say, oh, I see the world as it is, but I also see that the world as it could be, the world as it should be, as it will be, if you will only desire it and commit to it, if you will only submit to your own spoken desire for justice, freedom, equity, and compassion. I really appreciate this notion of being able to look at the world bifocally. I want those glasses. Seeing the world as it is and the world as it could be and should be, all at the same time. It makes space for both truth and hope. We can be real about what the world is like now and yet still hold on to that vision. Still hold on to that hope that love will win in the end. Given the state of our world at the moment, given the headlines we see and hear every day, given the week that we have just lived through, we need to be able to live in the world bifocally. We need that gritty, serviceable hope. There's plenty these days to despair about. There's plenty that indicates that love is not about to win anytime soon. There are some days where it feels like we are just drifting further and further away from the vision of the beloved community. But here's the thing. If we truly believe that love will win in the end, then if love hasn't won yet, it isn't the end. Our story is still going, and we need our vision of the world as it ought to be if we're ever going to get there. We need that vision of love winning in the end. Imagining the world as it ought to be is not wasting our time dreaming. It is an essential step to creating that world. Leonard Schlein writes, sometimes we forget that in order to learn something radically new, we need first to imagine it. If we want to radically change our world, and I know I want to, then we need to first imagine the world as it should be. Thomas Potter would never have gotten a Universalist preacher to preach about love at his church if he hadn't first had that vision. In my mind, this is why we have church. It is a place to imagine the world as it should be and to practice living into that vision even when it does not yet exist in the rest of the world. Thomas Potter built a church because he had a vision of a religion that preached love. We build church because we have a vision of beloved community, a vision that we come back here each week to remind ourselves of, a vision that we work each day to make into a reality. Here, we seek and speak the truth and find and proclaim hope all at once, just as Victoria Safford writes. In my mind, this is the ultimate work of church and of being a people of vision. I've seen this congregation live out this mission time and time again, speaking truth and finding hope, even when that truth doesn't lend itself well to hope. I will always remember that Sunday after the elections in 2016. We had just been through one of the most divisive election seasons in our history. And a lot of people came to church that week feeling raw and vulnerable. There was fear for what the future might look like, fear for where our country was headed. I brought sidewalk chalk and invited you all to come out after the service and write messages of love and hope on the sidewalk in front of the church. Now, this was one of those notions that I came up with, and I had no idea if you all were going to go along with it. But nearly everyone came out, and we filled the entire block with messages of love and hope. Do you remember that, those of you who were here? I had printed out this list of suggestions of what people could write in case people had trouble thinking of things. And not a single person needed one. Instead, you poured out your hearts on the sidewalk, chalking out the messages that you yourselves needed to hear. Some of you even took that chalk with you to spread the message of hope and love in your neighborhoods and around town. I think some chalk even made it to Boston. That day, we spoke the truth. We spoke of our worry and fear, of the hateful news cycle that we had been living in, of the fact of a country deeply divided about who we wanted to be. And at the same time, we found hope, didn't we? We found hope in one another, and we proclaimed it in messages written in rainbow colors outside our front doors. We were, in that moment, a people of vision, refusing to give up on the world as it ought to be. It's hard sometimes, right now, to hold truth and hope. Love definitely hasn't won. But the good news is that means our story isn't over yet. There is more love, more joy, more hope somewhere. And we're going to keep on till we find it. And in the meantime, at least we've got each other.